You wake up, you check your phone, you scroll, you eat, you stress, you work, you sleep, repeat. It feels like life, but it's not life. It's a loop, not a glitch, not an accident, a design. You weren't born into freedom. You were born into a system optimized for repetition. Habits disguised as choices, reactions mistaken for decisions. Each day, a slightly rebranded version of the one before it. You think you're moving, but you're tracing circles. Most people live their entire lives without ever realizing they're stuck. Because the loop isn't physical, it's neurological, energetic, spiritual. And here's the hardest part. The loop feels familiar, safe, normal, because you've been conditioned to think what's predictable is true. But what if your anxiety isn't yours? What if your constant fatigue isn't a flaw, but a signal? What if your dreams are the only time you're actually free? The simulation you live in doesn't need walls. It just needs patterns. And you are the code that keeps it running until you stop. This isn't about science fiction. This isn't metaphor. This is the loop, and this is how it keeps you asleep. The trap isn't built from chains. It's built from agreements. Some you made, most were made for you. Before you had the awareness to choose, you were born into language, into family systems, into belief structures that defined what was real, true, safe, and possible. Before you knew how to speak, you were absorbing commands, not shouted, whispered, repeated, encoded. Be good, stay small, don't ask too many questions, trust the experts, follow the system, fit the role. And so you did, not because you were weak, but because the system is strong. It rewards conformity with comfort. It punishes deviation with isolation. It surrounds you with others running the same program, people just as unaware of the loop as you are. And because everyone is looping together, it feels normal. But here's the brutal truth. What's normal is not neutral. It's reinforcement. Every TV show, every school lesson, every celebrity meltdown, every false choice between two sides of the same coin, it all feeds the loop. Even your failures are calculated. The burnout, the breakdowns, the midlife crisis. Those aren't glitches. They're built-in release valves, illusions of collapse that never let you fully fall. Because if you fall far enough, you might finally see. And the system can't risk that. The architecture is elegant, self-correcting, self-replicating. You don't need guards when people police themselves. So the question isn't just how to escape, it's how to even notice you're trapped. Because the deepest loops don't feel like prisons, they feel like home. To keep the loop running, the system needed more than distraction. It needed a you who would never leave it, so it built one. Piece by piece, the loop constructed a false self, a personality engineered from outside in. It's not who you are, it's who you were taught to be, a persona shaped by praise, punishment, comparison, and fear. It mimics your voice, it signs your name, it answers when someone calls you. But it isn't you, it's the mask you wear to survive inside the loop. And because it's kept you functional, you defend it. You call it me. You build a life around it. Career, identity, relationships, reputation. But here's what the loop never told you. That mask isn't you. It's your anchor. The loop doesn't trap your body. It traps your self-concept. It keeps you playing a role. And roles don't evolve. They repeat. Think about it. How many times have you said, I always attract the same type of people. I always end up back where I started. No matter what I do, something pulls me down. That's not bad luck. That's the loop, reinforcing its version of you, the version that will never leave. Because the moment you question the role, you begin to threaten the structure. The moment you pause and ask, who told me this is who I am? You introduce entropy into the code, and entropy is the loop's greatest enemy. That's why it rewards you for staying busy. That's why it makes silence feel dangerous. That's why when you start to change, the people around you get uncomfortable. Not because they don't love you, but because your shift challenges the loop they've come to depend on. The loop doesn't fear rebellion. It fears remembrance. Because if you remember who you were before the programming, you'll remember how to exit. If this is starting to feel too familiar, like something you've lived 1,000 times before, subscribe and hit the bell, because what comes next isn't just content, it's your signal. The loop was never sealed shut. It was always filled with exits, but none of them looked like doors. Because if the escape looked obvious, everyone would take it. The exits are subtle, invisible to the conditioned mind. They appear in moments you usually ignore, then vanish if you don't act. A deep breath when your body tells you to react. A strange dream that feels more real than waking life. A question that arrives in silence. Is this really who I am? These are keys, not handed to you, offered. And every time you ignore one, the loop strengthens. Every time you follow one, the loop cracks. They show up in patterns too, repeating numbers, déjà vu, sudden emotion with no cause. Those are echoes, residue from you brushing up against the edge. You felt it, that moment when time bends slightly, when something clicks, but you can't explain what. When a word, a sound, a place hits you deeper than logic allows. That's not coincidence, that's resonance. The simulation isn't built like a prison, it's built like a mirror. It reflects your vibration back to you, again and again, until you realize that to shift the pattern, you have to shift yourself, not your job, not your city, not your friends, your frequency. Because this loop is frequency dependent. It's tuned to who you think you are. Change the signal and the code around you starts to break down. That's why meditation works. Not because it makes you calm, but because it disentangles you from the script. That's why intention is powerful. Not because it gets you things, but because it writes new parameters into the field. That's why the truth is terrifying, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. The loop has always counted on your forgetfulness, but it has no defense against your awareness. So the real key isn't something you find, it's someone you become. When you break the loop, it doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like loss. The familiar starts to dissolve. Routines fall apart. People shift away. Even your thoughts begin to sound foreign. That's because you're no longer operating from the code that built your past. And what the loop calls stability was just repetition in disguise. Now, for the first time, you're in free fall, unscripted, unpredictable, unlooped. But the nervous system panics. It's been trained to associate the unknown with danger, so it tries to recreate the old pattern, pulls you back toward your old triggers, whispers in your ear, "This is too much, go back." But the truth is, you've outgrown the cage, and once the mind touches freedom, nothing inside the loop satisfies anymore. Here's what they don't tell you. Escaping the simulation doesn't mean leaving the world. It means re-entering it from a different frequency. The job doesn't vanish, but your purpose within it changes. The relationships don't disappear, but the dynamics rearrange. The suffering doesn't stop, but it no longer owns you. You stop reacting. You start responding, because you're no longer a node in someone else's network. You've become a transmitter. You shape the field around you, not the other way around. Synchronicities increase. Time distorts. You think of someone and they call. You speak truth and people feel it. You begin to realize reality isn't solid. It's elastic, and you've been bending it unconsciously your whole life. Now you're doing it on purpose. This is what living outside the loop feels like. More space, more silence, more presence. More power, not over others, but over the only thing that ever mattered, your state. The loop never had power, it borrowed yours, and now it's out of credit. Escaping the loop isn't about intelligence, it's about willingness. Most people don't stay in the simulation because they're blind. They stay because it's comfortable, because it's predictable, because it offers an identity. Even if that identity is built on pain. The loop feeds you just enough pleasure to keep you addicted, just enough chaos to keep you distracted, and just enough fear to keep you obedient. And it rewards one thing above all else: certainty. Be sure, be normal, be agreeable, Don't question, don't pause, don't look too closely, because if you do, the whole scaffolding starts to wobble, and once it wobbles, it can't be unseen. That's why when you start to wake up, people around you resist. They mock, minimize, distance, not because they're your enemy, but because your awakening threatens the illusion they depend on. You don't just exit the simulation for you, you destabilize it for everyone you touch, and that's terrifying for those still invested in the lie. So what do? They cling harder, they defend the loop, they protect the illusion, because in the absence of truth, even suffering can feel like safety. The system knows this. That's why it doesn't care if you're unhappy, as long as you're predictably unhappy. The loop doesn't fear pain, it fears change, because real change isn't aesthetic, it's energetic. It reverberates, it breaks timelines, it makes you unrecognizable to the person you used to be. And once you step fully into that change, you can't go back. Not emotionally, not energetically, not spiritually. You can pretend, you can shrink, you can try to re-enter the simulation for convenience or connection, but your frequency has already burned the bridge behind you. That's why most people stay. Because the real cost of freedom is this: you have to leave behind the version of you that the loop loved. Once you've exited the loop, you become something the system can't predict. A disruptor, not by yelling, not by fighting, but simply by being. Your energy destabilizes the code. Your clarity interrupts the pattern. Your presence exposes the lie. You walk into rooms and people shift without knowing why. You speak from a place they forgot existed. You carry a stillness that threatens their noise. And suddenly you realize you don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to fix anyone. You don't even need to be understood. You just need to stay online. The loop will test you. It will try to seduce you back into its comfort. Old wounds, old dynamics, old versions of you wrapped in new costumes. You'll feel the urge to explain yourself, to soften your edges, to make others comfortable again. But that's the final trick of the loop, to make you think your awakening was selfish. It wasn't. It was necessary, because when you exit, you become a signal to others who are ready. A mirror for the ones who are beginning to feel the glitch. A guide, not by teaching, but by embodiment. You stop being a consumer of energy. You start being a generator of it. And here's what changes everything. You no longer chase purpose. You become the field in which purpose finds you. That's when synchronicity becomes a lifestyle. That's when time bends around your intention. That's when the simulation stops simulating and starts responding, because you've moved from within the code to the source of it. And the disruptor's path isn't about war, it's about resonance. Hold it long enough, and the entire system reshapes around you. Escaping the simulation is not the end. It's the beginning of an entirely different existence. One where the rules aren't fixed, where meaning isn't assigned, where truth isn't given. It's remembered. But here's the paradox. The loop doesn't disappear after you exit. It just loses its grip. It still whispers, still tempts, still offers shortcuts. The final glitch is you choosing to stay awake, because awakening isn't an event, it's a practice. You'll be pulled by comfort, by nostalgia, by old versions of you that want one more day of sleep, and no one will stop you. There are no guards, no alarms, just a quiet moment where you either choose truth or slide back into the script. But every time you choose awareness, you rewrite the field. You start to see the simulation not as prison, but as a playground, not as punishment, but as potential. Because the real secret isn't escaping the simulation, it's learning to bend it from within, to shift timelines with your attention, to upgrade your world by upgrading your frequency, to walk as someone who knows this entire thing is code, and you are the coder. So now the loop is broken, you're standing outside it. The simulation is still running, but you're no longer of it. And now there's only one question left, the one the loop can't answer. Now that you've remembered the truth, what kind of reality will you build? drop it below. Because someone, somewhere, is stuck in their loop, waiting for your words to wake them up.